Welcome to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the meaning and the power of the most important story in business. The one that answers why someone should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story that defines the very character and nature of an organization. At Vendilli, we call it your capital S story. In each episode of Storylines Live, we feature guests who have great insights on business storytelling, who can share their experiences and key learnings to help you and your business do a better job of sharing your capital S story to drive remarkable business results. Now, today, in this episode, we're honored to have Steve Walsh as our guest. You know, most entrepreneurs spend years, sometimes decades, building a business. They sacrifice weekends, take on risk, navigate uncertainty, and eventually they reach this point where they've actually won, ideally. They've grown past the early struggle, had a liquidity event maybe, or built something that finally generates real money. And that's exactly, in Steve's view, when a lot of them make the biggest financial mistake in their lives. Steve spent 30 years on both sides of the capital table as an operator who's built and acquired businesses and as a private equity investor who's watched what happens when successful founders handle their money like amateurs. Steve founded Bison Equity Group and wrote the book, Make the 10X Leap, to give entrepreneurs a framework for what comes after the win, how to deploy their capital with discipline, how to structure deals that protect the downside, and how to build wealth that actually lasts. Whether you, as a watcher or a listener of this podcast, are approaching an exit or sitting on capital you're not sure what to do with, or maybe you just want to start thinking like an owner instead of a speculator, our conversation in this episode is going to be worth your time. And guess what, folks? Your story is critically important to this whole process. Steve, thanks for being with here on this episode. Anything I missed in?
No, Paul, it's great. The one thing is I'm coming out with another book. It's called The Black Book for High Net Worth Investors. But I'm glad, the one thing you talk about is stories.
Yeah.
And every time I look at a company, the one thing that I always look at is what's the story? What is your story? Why did you start this company? And, it never fails that, you get this story about, they were in their basement or their garage and they started that way. And they forget that people love stories. When it comes to creating a company, people buy from people and they love the story to go along with it. And that story is the one thing that they can use to sell their products even more. I always say, how can you bring your customer into your story? Because people love a great story. When it comes to creating something that is unique or different, how you make yourself unique or different. Everybody can sell on Amazon, but if you can bring somebody into what truly is, the magic of your company, that's where really the secret sauce is. And I think a lot of companies forget about that.
Oh,
That,
yeah.
And I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but a great story can make a great company. Even the publicly traded companies, Apple's got a great story. I would say Microsoft, any of the companies that you look at their story, the marketing behind that really makes a big difference. Elon Musk is a great example of a good story. The people buy from people. And I go back to that every time I look at is, of the age of AI right now, I think people are going to want a more of a connection to people, to the person. And that because there's so much of that AI going around that how can you trust it? And when you have that trust, if you don't have that trust, you just become another product that everybody else is selling, that the Amazons of the world. And when you have I always say AI is going to be great for back office. It's the front that's going to make the difference.
Yeah, 100% agree, Stephen. Like you said a couple minutes ago, business is people selling to people. Now, I know there are some examples out there of AI selling to AI, But hearts and minds are two things that AI doesn't have. And your point about sales, what the goal of great sales ought to be is to move hearts and minds and inspire action. And at
Right.
least today, that's something that only we can accomplish with human biology. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Steve, speaking of stories, is because as an expert, you went so far to write a book. And as you said, you're going to have your second book coming out very shortly. Could you give our audience a sense of why it was important for you to write the 10x Sleep book? What's the story behind that book?
Yeah, so I saw a lot of entrepreneurs doing a lot of the same things. They were really either they were really comfortable where they're at, or they were really struggling where they're at. One of the two. They were putting in the 80 hours a week, or they were just comfortable what they were doing with the company, not knowing there's a better way, there's a bigger way to do it. That's really why I started this book, and I saw some great entrepreneurs that were doing some of the things that they saw the 10x. They saw what was capable. And a lot of times it's a matter of taking yourself out of the picture and looking back into your company as a business owner, not as the doer, the person that's always in the weeds. A lot of times I see that a lot of entrepreneurs, they get deep in the weeds and then they kind of lose track of what actually they're doing.
Hmm.
you know, what their why was. And so they struggle with that. And that's why I created the book is like it gives you the framework of able to look at your company in a different way. And I always say is if you can look at yourself and your company in a different way. And I always go back to the same thing is not so much what you're doing in your company, but also what are you doing with yourself?
Oh,
That
sure.
it makes a huge difference too on the health wise. I say, how you taking care of yourself? It
Hmm.
makes a difference. It shows also too a lot of times in your company and your customers and your employees. That culture I go back to is really important when you're creating a company. How do you create that culture? And that makes a huge difference. I had a good stories. I go back to some of the stories that I came with companies that I've talked to or worked with. I go back to this one story that really resonated with me is there was a guy on a line. It was they were making helmets, just bike helmets. You think that the lineman that was an everyday job, 9 to 5, didn't really matter until you talk to the guy. He's on the line. He's telling me a story, points at a board, and on that board is lots of these letters that they got from people saying, "Hey, thanks for saving my life."
Mm.
The guy pointed that and said, "That's why I'm here." That is, and so when you're creating something, that story makes a huge difference because it resonates throughout your business and your customers' business, their life.
Yeah, that is really great. And Steve, I love what you said. In a story context, part of what you do is helping owners, entrepreneurs play a different role, right? When they
Right.
start the company, they are the doer. Maybe
Correct.
it's just them in the basement, but the role of the owner is different than the role of the doer, even if you're still maybe involved in doing some things, delivering the product or the service. You're trying to get people to understand that the role of an owner requires a different set of thinking skills, right?
So true. And that's where I come back to is a lot of times, they want to bring in capital right away.
Yes.
And I like to step back and have them think differently. Because if they don't have systems in place, they don't have people in place, that capital gets wasted. It gets wasted on things that they probably shouldn't be doing. And so really what it comes down to is your sales process, how that looks. And then from there, it's like, okay, then let's look at bringing capital in. The capital is how you want to structure it, how you want to bring it in. I can look at myself as a partner. When I come in as I'm a partner with the company, not so much, you know, I try to do is bring in systems, people, or I bring in capital And that's really where it works because a lot of times, like I said, is I go back to the same thing is when they bring in capital, be prepared to make decisions that bigger decisions that you probably ever made. And those decisions are going to be, you know, that gets to the point where it becomes a 10x.
Right. That's awesome. Well, one of the things we like to do on storylines as well is to understand the motivating story of the expert that we're talking to. So Steve, what's your story? How of all the things you could do, did you wind up developing this passion to help companies in the way that you do at Bison?
The thing is, I was always an entrepreneur, even as a kid. And that's where I kind of started as an entrepreneur. I was fixing motorcycles when I was a kid
Wow.
and selling motorcycles. And then from there, I got into investing really early, read the Wall Street Journal when I was a kid, some of the weird things like that.
No
But
kidding.
I would say I think that's where it started. I started when I was young. And when I look at back to a lot of the things I did, like accounting was one of the things I went into. It really helped me to look at balance sheets, income statements, the things that really started in my journey, created I guess, the tools that I needed for the journey that I
Mhm.
am now. So it's kind of steps along the way. And
Right.
those are the things I look at as the story I created was as an investor and looking at companies different than the owner does. I look at companies all the time and it starts with the people first. I think that was the one thing I learned. I had some really good mentors along the way and people make a company. And then on
Mhm.
top of that is the other side is the financial side of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, now I have to ask you the random question because I know a lot of our audience is going to be wondering. You still ride bikes?
I don't. I don't. I have not. It's funny. I love the outdoors, but motorcycles is not one of the things I've really kept up with. But I do. I always look at those motorcycles, and I love to tinker, and so that's
Right.
one of the things. That's I think creating is one of the things I like to do.
I love that. One of the things that, although I know a lot of investors spend some time as an operator, you spent quite a bit of time as an operator as well as an investor. How does your experience as an operator influence what you do as an investor?
I think I have empathy for the operator because I understand what it takes. It's not easy. And there's a lot of things that the decisions that they have to make, a lot of the things that they have to do. But I always say that if you can bring somebody like me in, it makes it a lot easier because, I go back to the same thing, coaching, mentors, people like that bring in somebody like me, it helps getting you to the next level. It actually helps you get out of your own way. You know,
Yes.
I think that's probably the one thing is a lot of times entrepreneurs, they tend to not get out of their own way. And so they're doing a lot of things they shouldn't be doing.
So true, so true, and we see that a lot in our work too. That's great. I, I'm sure a lot of our audience is thinking to themselves, "Wait a minute, an investor who has empathy." I think that's really a great thing, and we're going to dig into that in just a minute. We're going to take a quick break, and folks, when we come back, we're going to talk more about what Steve and Bison do to help the companies they work with. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The one that explains why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. In this episode, we're honored to have Steve Walsh with us from Bison Equity Group. And Steve is an expert in answering that one question, why people would invest in you, because that is indeed a big part of what he does every day. So I guess, Steve, I'd kick it off here to talk more about Bison and what you do by asking, how do you help the people in the businesses that you serve?
Yeah, I try to do is try to make them look at their company different. I look at it as try to look at it as you as an investor.
Right.
How would you look at your company as an investor? And so it is. how do I grow that company then?
Mhm.
I always say the one thing is, where do you want to go? A lot of companies they'll look at is they'll say, "Oh, I want to get 10 million." I said, "Well, then why not 100?" So I said, "It's just as hard to get to 100 million as it's 10 million."
Yes.
So I always say work backwards from there. And that's where I look at is if we can work backwards, what do we need to have in place to get to that 100 million mark? That is really what it looks like is then from there, it's like, okay, what do I need to help with you? Do I need to bring in people? Do I need to bring in systems or is it capital? Do we need capital? And what kind of capital do we need? The one thing I always say is, what kind of capital do you want? Do you want smart capital or you want dumb capital?
Oh, wow.
Big difference.
Well, what
Right?
is the difference, Steve?
The difference is smart capital will bring you open doors for you. Either they'll
Mm.
bring in open doors for you that you've probably never been able to open. They'll bring in ideas. They'll bring in maybe they have a long list of clients that you have been trying to get at. The
Yeah.
things like that.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
smart capital. Dumb capital is here's a check. Okay, I expect a return. That's really what it is.
Right.
There's really nothing. There's It's a transaction, and there's really nothing that you're going to get out of it. I would say that's probably the expectations on that is high. They expect a lot from that. The smart capital, they understand that, it's not a straight line.
Mhm.
They understand that there is going to be some bumps, but they also understand that if you can actually, if they can for some reason come in and say, "Hey, this is what I see is happening. What do you need? What is it that you need to get to this next level? What is it that you need so we can get to the next level? What problems are you having right now?"
Right.
I
Right.
think that's the one thing that a lot of entrepreneurs think that private equity, they come in, take over. They don't take over. They see maybe there is problems that you're having that they
Mhm.
can fix for you.
Right. Like you said a few minutes ago, when you folks get involved, you may be bringing people and resources, not just I mean, the dollars are always a consideration, right, Steve?
Right.
But like you said, making connections, getting the entrepreneur in front of other people maybe in the marketplace for their products or services that they hadn't thought of, right? Yeah.
The other thing is too, thinking bigger. A lot of times entrepreneurs get stuck on thinking very small and they're not thinking bigger. And that's the other thing is I look at is when you're looking at a company, I look at a bigger version of what their company could be.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
There's that quote that Einstein supposedly said, which he later said he never uttered, something to the effect of the same level of awareness that got you where you are is insufficient to get you to the next level. That's
right.
what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it
Right.
is. And I think a lot of times it's because, I go back to who you're surrounding yourself with.
Yes. Yeah.
You look at if you want to be a bigger version of your company or a bigger version of yourself, who do you surround yourself with?
Yeah.
People that are bigger than you.
Exactly. Steve, can you give us a little bit of the history of Bison, when you started it, size, et cetera?
So yeah, so I started this. This was kind of a build up. I started, I would say, starting this company about 8 years ago, and it really came into fruition about 5 years ago. And one of the things I look at is why I did Bison and Bison Equity Group is the one thing a Bison does is it runs through a storm because it knows it gets to the other side that it is going to be a better, they're going to get through that storm.
Right.
And I always look at it as an entrepreneur, the same thing.
Mhm.
If they see they can get through that storm, that maybe that sticking point they have, or if they get to, there's a bigger version the other side. And so that's why I started as a Bison Equity Group because of that.
Wow.
And I think it's, one of the things it's entrepreneurs, I'm always cheering on the little guy because that
Yes.
little guy can be bigger, just as big. I always say a small company is only small because of the entrepreneurs thinks that way. So that the one thing is you look at is there's so many opportunities right now that, that you can be a bigger player. And it's a matter of like just thinking, getting out of your own way, doing things that a lot of other entrepreneurs aren't doing. And I would say if your competitor's doing it, maybe you shouldn't be. You should be, doing things that you probably then your competitor is not doing.
Yeah, 100% agree, and from the story aspect of it, science tells us that people want choice, right?
Yeah.
So even in a heavy B2B environment, maybe you're in manufacturing or some flavor of tech, it's just human psychology that your buyer does not want to hear the same story 3
No.
times. If they're gonna get down to 3 companies that they're evaluating, they wanna know what's different about you, right? And
Right.
and that's not just the story, it feeds into the operational aspect of things, right, Steve?
Yeah, it's the me too, that you don't want to be the me too that follows this, the herd. I
Right.
think you want to be different. You want to, if everybody's veering right, you want to veer left. That's kind of the mentality I have is that, and I always say that if you see one entrepreneur veering left and everybody's doing right, you might want to look at the one going left
Yeah.
because that's the one that more than likely is going to be the one that's going to be farther ahead than everybody else is.
Yeah, probably onto something, right, Steve?
Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the history of the company, I know that you've had some successes and you may not be able to share names or specifics, but I think to give the audience a sense of what you folks do and what you're able to achieve. Can you share
Yeah, so we've done everything from biogas. We did a project with biogas that was, I would say, it was very short and it was a good lucrative return. We also did stuff in real estate and the real estate side that a lot of times I always say that, go where the puck is going to be,
yeah.
that, and a lot of times what we do is we try to find places where the puck's going to be. And that's one of the areas we looked at. It was at the time was in Florida, real estate was very hit really hard. And we went down there and bought real estate down there. And that was a great opportunity that everybody said why at the
Mhm.
time. And we did it anyway. So I think what we try to do is go where the puck is, not,
Mhm.
you know, right now, but is going to be. So that's what we look at.
Are there particular industries or niches that you're focusing on right now in your work, Steve?
Yeah, I do like manufacturing and I do like software. The one thing is manufacturing has always been one of those areas because I always am intrigued about what's going on.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, with entrepreneurs, they do, they either make a great widget or they are making, either a great piece of software. I think the one thing I'm seeing right now, especially the next 10 years, there's this baby boomer, I would say, I always go 55 is not baby boomer, but 55 to 80-year-old.
Yes.
That is opportunity right now they're thinking of selling their company or exiting out, things like that. They don't have a sibling or somebody to sell it to or kids to sell it to. And it's an opportunity to go in and look at a company that maybe has done okay, that can make it seem like a better opportunity. Maybe it
Right.
make it a bigger company, and that's what I'm seeing a lot of that happening right now. And it's the opportunity is going to be, I think, for the next 10 years is going to be like that.
Transformative, and it's a generational thing
Very much
across
so.
industries, right?
Yeah,
Although, given when a lot of these companies started, there's plenty of them that are tech or manufacturing oriented.
very.
That's awesome. Steve, is there anything you wished I had asked that we didn't talk about yet?
So the one thing I would say we're creating right now is entrepreneurs. I go back to this one thing that a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't want clicks, they don't want likes, they're sick of creating content. I'd
Yeah.
say the one thing that they really want is sales.
Yes.
And the one thing we created is this sales architect program. And
Mhm.
what this does, a lot of entrepreneurs have things that they're not selling that they could be selling.
Yeah.
Maybe they're giving it away. It's stuff that they've been giving away for free that they could be selling. Things like that, it makes them think differently. And so this program that we created is specifically for that entrepreneur that maybe they're selling maybe 1 or 2 different things. I always say, if you have 5 revenue streams, that's really what I like to see.
Wow.
And I'd like to see at least one of them is reoccurring. A
Yes.
lot of manufacturers think they can't do that. I I always say there's at least one idea that they could do that something different. And I always go back to, what do they want? They want sales. Everybody wants sales.
Exactly.
And they don't want the clicks, they don't want the likes, a lot of that stuff they think will get sales, but I always say is what's truly driving sales.
Yes. Yeah, that's profound. Steve, how can our audience best find you?
So yeah, great. Reach out to me at Steve at bisonequitygroup.com or go to my website, bisonequitygroup.com. Also, my book is on Amazon. It's Make the 10X Leap.
Mhm.
My new book's coming out, and that's going to be the black book for high net worth investors.
Can you give our audience just kind of a quick synopsis of the new book?
Yeah, the new book is really how to think of as like an investor
Hmm.
differently than a lot of investment books. They give you how to analyze companies, and that's part of that too. But a
Sure.
lot of it's to do with how to win. It's the mindset is how to win versus just not to lose. That's the thing I always look at is when you're as an investor, you want to win, not just to lose, not that. I think that's where it comes down to. So that's where the book is a lot different, I think, in some sense of how to look at investing.
Right. And I think that's great because, the table stakes, the things that you do in due diligence, if it was that simple,
Yeah.
why do so many investors lose rather than win, right? That's
Right.
the point, right? Well,
Right.
I'm very excited. I think our audience will really enjoy that book as well as your first book, The 10X Leap. And Steve, I want to say thanks again for being on Storylines Live. Really appreciate having you on. And folks will have all the links that Steve mentioned in the show notes. And I want to say thanks to the audience for being with us for this episode on Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business, the one that answers why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. Your capital S story. We'll see you next time on the next episode of Storylines Live.